This afternoon is a session about the law of international territorial and border disputes. Do you hear me? No problem? Do you see the slides? I need a confirmation of. Okay, thank you, Paula.
You bet.
Okay, perfect. So let's start our session. Remember, the main idea of this Law of Borders Institute is to develop a complex approach of the legal phenomenon of borders with multiple dimensions: the dimension of the line, the dimension of the link, the dimension of the crossing, the dimension of the zone, and you have also the dimension of disputes. So with all these perspectives, you could have a complete, almost complete understanding of what are borders, international borders in the world, and the importance to have multiple angles of view, multiple prism of analysis. So today our session is focused on the law of territorial and border disputes. I have divided this session in three parts. We will speak about the law of territorial and border dispute. We will analyze and examine different selected dispute cases, and we will speak about cross-border environmental dispute. Okay, so the main ideas of this session, we have to think first about the international public law, and this international public law, it means the international law between states, have the main goal to avoid border disputes. Second main idea, there are many specific processes and progressive steps to avoid border disputes. Some authors have identified three main types of border and territorial disputes. The first type is a territorial dispute, the second type is a positional dispute, and the third type is functional dispute. And you will see also that sometimes the situations on the ground are too complex, and it's an hybridization of these three types of dispute, of course. It depends on the context. But it's helpful to have this grid of lecture to analyze the complexity of every situation. So we will see also that the dispute of a terrestrial nature are based on the historical titles and effectivities. And on the contrary, the disputes of maritime nature, the solutions of the conflict are based on equity and geometry. But because I like history, and I'm sure you like history too, let's dig deep in the history of the violence of the dispute between humans. We have proof, evidence that the violence between human groups are from the Paleolithic age. So it means before 10,000 years, before the 10,000 years before Christ. So it's a long time ago. And some authors have identified the first evidence of an intergroup violence in Kenya 10,000 years before Christ. And the specialist of this study, Martha Mirazon-Lar, a lead author and archaeologist, believes that people have always been willing to fight for what they want, and that forming groups leads to cultural divisions, thus justifying war. And she's speaking about what happened 10,000 years before Christ for these specific groups of humans in Kenya who were hunter-gatherers. So in a nutshell, the violence between human groups are a long historic phenomenon. And she precised the prerequisites for battle have existed for a very long time independently of the development of agriculture. Remember the first session we spoke about the Neolithic revolution. It was very important because the first stock of agriculture, the first stock of food were protected, and they started to develop villages, fortification, etc. But we have also a proof of the existence of intergroup violence long time before the appearance of agriculture. Okay. Let's dig a little bit of this example of the first 10,000 years ago, 10,000 years before Christ. And I have here another example of a battle. Look at this beautiful picture. It's a battle scene found in a cave in North Africa. You could identify two human groups. Easy, on the left, on the right, and you could see maybe it's the first front. You know, frontier is the name, the origin of the word frontier is from the word front, and front is the front of two armies. So look at that. Maybe it's the first depiction of a real battle with two fronts, the front of the army on the left and the front of the army on the right. So it seems that the army on the left is outnumbered, how do you say, more people in the army on the right, and the left army is like losing a little bit the terrain. But the in-between, the in-between is the field of battle, and later, 1,000 years later, it's the origin of the name front. It's the origin of the name frontier for the people who knows this terminology. Is the synonym of border. It's another English term for border, but it's also a French term for saying borders. So, and this picture is from 5,000, 4,000 years before Christ. After the first intergroup violence, when appeared the first wars? We have an evidence of the Battle of Hamukar, 3,500 years before Christ. That's the first battle called war. Before it was violence between human groups, but this time they could identify some specificities of this battle, and they could identify this battle as the first war. Why? Because it impacted a complete city. It was a destruction of a city. That's the first known war. We call that war because between these two people, at the end, one people was completely destroyed with the full destruction of the city. And they found projectiles like balls of clay as a weapon to destroy this city. But of course, we are not the first people to think about the war and the conflict and the dispute and the law of disputes. The first philosopher, Greek philosopher, have thought about that already, and they developed a strong political thought about wars and about just wars. So Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, they were already thinking about the condition, political condition, and the nature of wars at their time. And Plato is interesting what he says. But he said, against whom will you advise the Athenians to wage war? Against those who act unjustly or against those who practice justice? You know, because they were also philosophers, their expression of war are also philosophical. I mean, and Cicero, the Roman Empire, was one of the first authors to make a distinction between different types of violence, the jus ad bellum and the jus in bello. We will see some details, modern details later. But Cicero made a first kind of description of two types of wars. And the people who are studying war, they use the scientific terminology as polemology. So let's go more on the concrete after the historical overview and the philosophical overview of what is war and what is dispute. When you confront the borders, conflict or conflict linked to the borders, you have multi-dimension, of course, okay? When you will have to analyze different border disputes, you will see you need to bring different data from different perspectives. You need to understand the context, as we have seen with Nick McGowan this morning. We have to analyze the diversity of actors, and that was the purpose of your practicum, to put your feet in the different the skin of different actors. You need to analyze the conflict at different scales or levels. You need also to have the different representation of the people who are involved in this issue. You need also to analyze the relation of powers, the economic and technological differences between the opponents, the historical background, the geographical space or the factors and demographic factors. All these elements are indicators or factors to analyze when you are analyzing deeply and completely a border dispute. So of course, it's not easy for one people to have all these perspectives in mind. And of course, the narratives, the battle of narratives, battles of stories are very also important in geopolitics of border disputes. Example, but that's interesting because you have lived that during the practicum of this morning. When you are Kurdistan, when you are Kurdish people in the Kurdistan, you will have another analysis than the Turkish people in Turkey, etc., etc. So it's impossible to have a simple analysis of every border dispute. You need to take in account all these different representations of the conflict with their different stories. One expert, I thought it was very interesting to share with you. So this Robert Volterra is an English expert for international border dispute, and he wrote that in 2021. What is critical in boundary disputes, whether land or maritime boundary disputes, are the facts and the evidence. Sometimes is the most difficult thing to have is to have a clear descriptions of what happened on the ground and what happened between these countries. And of course, the facts are also evidence. So the most difficult part when you are an expert in front of the judges is to have a clear description of the facts and a clear description of the evidence to prove or to defend the position of your government or of your actors. And of course, because you are in the Institute of Law of Borders, you know evidence are always a tool for defending your interest. So let's speak now about the three types of border disputes. The first type, as I said in the introduction, is a territorial dispute. It's when there are major disagreements over the course of a boundary line associated with territorial claims. So it means in the ground, nothing is clear. Maybe you don't have borders, but you have a lot of claims from different people and from different states. That's a territorial dispute when you have a huge amount of space who are in the situation. The second type of the dispute is a positional dispute. It's more precise than the territorial dispute. It's when there are disputes about precision or definition of the delimitation or the demarcations. The problem here is the precision, is the exact location of the markers, of the border marker or end of the line, because the line, as you know, is a succession of points and interconnection between markers and reference points on this slide. Its example, maybe Paula will speak later about her article about the Mont Blanc dispute between Italy and France, because I think it's a positional dispute of the precise line on the top of the Mont Blanc or White Mount in Europe. The third type of dispute is a functional dispute. It's not concerned with the line or the delimitation. It's concerned with the crossing phenomenon of natural resources or of public policies or a flow of people or everything crossing the border by a natural way or because it's a human phenomenon are part of the functional dispute. That's the three types of border dispute. I think they are very useful. This grid of lecture is very useful to frame all the current disputes around the world. But I told you, sometimes they are overlapping, of course. But I think this grid of lecture is very useful to understand the problems and the border disputes today. Let's move on some examples. An example of territorial dispute, clearly, Crimea is one of a territorial dispute. Positional dispute, we have one in Canada close to Victoria, where we are here, between Canada and USA. They disagree with the position of the exact line between some islands. We have a functional dispute, and the example is between Spain and Morocco about the management of migratory human phenomenon, if you want, at the level of Ceuta and Melilla. But functional dispute of this type, it could be on all along the trajectory of the people who are on the move, you know. But you could have also an example of how two countries are managing the drug, the cross-border movement of drugs, etc., etc., etc. And also the example of the Schengen rules at the external and internal borders. All these issues are in the category of the functional dispute. You could share, and maybe I could ask you a question later about your country or your region. And this morning, some people have shared their experience, their knowledge about some situation, conflictual situation in their country. And maybe you have other ideas you could share with all the group of students today, this afternoon. So let's dig now, after our grid of lecture, in the relations between the law and the war. And we have three expressions you need to know: the jus ad bellum, the jus in bello, and the jus contra bello. These three definitions, these three expressions are helping us to understand different law connected to the war. But we are all agreed, it seems completely contradictory to have a law of wars and law in the same phrase, you know? Because the main of law finally is to create peaceful relations between human groups, not to defend or organize the war. But unfortunately, it's not the case. We have law specifically dedicated for the regulation of wars. And we have three legal expressions. The first, jus ad bellum, is the right to engage in the war, is the right to go in the conflict. So it's an old rule used during the Middle Ages, rule used in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. And this jus ad bellum, this law of going into the war, has completely changed during the 20th century and until today. The transformation of the law and war appeared with the jus in bello. The jus in bello is you could have the right to do the war, but you need to do the war with the main, with the human reasoning, with the human dimension. You don't need to kill innocent people during your war. You have the right to fight against another army, okay, is the jus in bellum, jus ad bellum, but during this war, you can't do what you want. You need to respect some important rules, and that's the jus in bello, the law during the war. And they call that international humanitarian law. So unfortunately, this expression is not clearly as it should be, because it's finally just the law inside the conflict, when the military systems should respect the life of citizens, innocent citizens. And of course, you have different regulations on this international humanitarian law. What is the jus contra bellum? The jus contra bellum is the development since 1945 against the wars. This, we have a number of articles in the Charter of the United Nations where the goal, the aims of these articles are against the war. The goal of this article is to limit the wars on this world, is to limit the use of military force, is to forbid the wars. But of course, as we know in this reality today, this use contra bellum has been weakened a lot. In the detail, this humanitarian law states cannot use weapons that cannot distinguish between civilian and military targets. So if they have missiles, a bomb, or grenades, or tanks, etc., they need this technology, or the human use of these weapons should clearly avoid the injury or the death of innocent civils peoples. The distinction is between combatant and non-combatant, fighter and non-fighter. If the two armies want to kill each other, it's only combatants against combatants, but the non-combatants should be always protected from the wars. Recently, after the war between in Palestine, the specialist in international humanitarian law, Mathilde Philippe Gray, wrote a very important phrase. In a conflict, we can all have an opinion, but from a strictly legal point of view, we must always start from the victims and the crimes committed against them. Because one day, and I lived in France, so I know the story of France and the conflict with Germany, the conflicts with Italy. It was not a long time ago during the First World War, Second World War. And with the creativity of some thinkers, we have been able to build European Union to overcome these wars between neighbor states. And of course, a lot of victims have been existing during these two world wars. So it's important to have that in mind. We shouldn't have civilian victims, and the victims are the central interest here to diminish their injury or their death. But let's look let's take a distance a little bit and let's speak about the general relations between dispute and international relations. Okay, we know that international relations, and I know some of you are very aware about the history of international relations because they have studied that. So when you have international relations, you have inevitably some disputes, some conflicts, but maybe not all the time wars, of course, and we will see why in few slides. The major role you need to know as a legal specialist or as non-legal specialist is the importance of the Charter of United Nations elaborated in 1945. That's the key legal document which is the legal structure of the world today. And on this Charter of United Nations in 1945, so just after the end of the Second World War, they developed different legal mechanisms, legal obligations to oblige the states to not do wars. Technically and legally, what is a dispute? Because we could speak about a lot of terminology, dispute, conflict, wars, battles. So the jurisprudence and the doctrine has proposed different definition of what is a dispute. And in the jurisprudence from the Permanent Court of International Justice in 1924, the judges proposed this definition of what is a dispute. A dispute is a disagreement on a point of law or fact, a contradiction, a conflict of legal views or interests between two persons. That's a clear legal definition accepted and validated by the judges of the International Court of Justice of this time. And an author who is a specialist in the law of disputes has given some precisions for this quote Scalia. The main distinction is this one. He made a distinction between international dispute and international conflict. International dispute for this author involves relations between different subjects that do not pose a danger to international peace and security. International dispute. While international conflict is a threat to peace or even a violation of it. So when you study the numerous conflicts all around the world today, maybe this distinction between international disputes and international conflict is useful to categorize the conflict which exists currently. We are digging more and more on the jus contra bellum. Remember, the jus contra bellum is the obligation of the state to respect the peace, to settle disputes peacefully. That's the main legal obligation in the world today between states. We know also, unfortunately, or fortunately for other people, they could think what they want on that, but the international society, you don't have a boss, you don't have a chief, you have no centralized power. It's a decentralized society without supreme authority. So it's difficult when you have conflict between 2 or 3 states to have someone who is able to manage the conflict internally, because it doesn't exist. It's not centralized. It's always decentralized. That's the description, the basic description of the world today. We have 193 political entities classified as states. We have other legal entities which are not states. And during with this global panorama of legal entities, no one is able to say the rule for everyone, because it's a decentralized society. That's important to understand. And it's not an excuse, but is one factor of explanation of the difficulties in the world today. So the main obligation, I repeat, the main legal obligation of the world today that the state should respect, that the state, the 193 member states of Europe, the United Nations should respect, is to settle disputes peacefully. That's the main important general obligation in international law. And we have 2 articles in this Charter of United Nations, the Article 2.3 and the Article 2.4, and I will read them to share with you the details about the general obligation to settle disputes peacefully. The first article, Article 2.3, states, all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means, in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. Article 2.4, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any states, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. So you have here a clear legal writing in force, which imposes the obligation to the states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means. That's the most important rules, I repeat. And you have also a third article to read in connection with the 2 others. It's very dedicated to the Pacific settlement of disputes. It's the chapter 6, article 33, and article 33.1. The parties to any dispute, the continuance of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, shall first of all seek a solution by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agency or arrangement, or other peaceful means of their own choice. It's not an exhaustive list, but remember that the states have the obligation to settle dispute peacefully first, and to settle dispute peacefully, they have different means, legal means. And that's the list of the legal means to settle dispute peacefully. This list is not exhaustive. They could create order, or they could use different means. but the states are free to choose what is the best legal mean for settling their dispute and to avoid a war or a military conflict. We are going to go deep, a little bit deeper in all these different categories. We have all this list could be divided in two means, two legal types of means. First is diplomatic mode, and second is a jurisdictional mode. So the diplomatic mode, if you have been diplomat in your life, or if you would like to be a diplomat, etc., you need to masterize, you need to have that in mind. You have different steps, different means to discuss with your opponent or with the person who have a different interest of yours. And don't forget, it's also progressive. If you start by negotiation, after that you go peacefully in the good offices, after that you could use investigation. You know, you take your time, it's a diplomatic work, it's not rushing. So let's dig a little bit on the first diplomatic mode: negotiation, good offices, investigation, mediation, and conciliation. And after that, we will go deep in the jurisdictional mode, as it means it's the role of the Court of Justice or the role of the arbitration. So what is negotiation? Negotiation can serve as preventive action in a possible dispute. It's also a mean for settling the dispute. But the goal of the game in this negotiation, so you could imagine it's a long process between different high level of diplomat people. But the goal of this negotiation, of course, is to avoid any increase on the conflict and to settle the conflict with political common interest. If the negotiation doesn't work, you could do a transaction. Transaction means you could pay, you could use money to help to settle the negotiation. The good offices. The good offices is not a negotiation directly by the two or the two states, but it's the use of the third party. A third party could help to establish contacts. Okay, imagine two countries, they don't want to speak with each other. It exists a lot between, example, Iran and United States. They could use a third party to help to improve their communication between them. Mediation. The mediation, the difference with the negotiation and the good offices, the mediation, it plays an active role. It proposes solution. In the good offices step, the third person was not mandated to propose a solution. But in this case, the case of the mediation, the mediator has a more important role. It could propose ideas, propose creative solutions. Investigation, well, but that we have seen that during the last 2 years. It's the establishment of a scientific committee and also political committees or human rights committees to go on the ground and to collect evidences of the facts. That's what it means, investigation. For example, with the Ukraine-Russia war, the Human Rights Council has created an investigation mission to establish the facts on the ground on this region. Other means to settle a dispute, the conciliation. Conciliation is the extension of negotiation, and you need to accept the proposition elaborated in common. That was the progressive list of diplomatic mode to settle peacefully a dispute. Now let's go on the other type, the jurisdictional means of settling a dispute. We have the arbitration, and we spoke this morning with the arbitration. I remember Nick Begoran was speaking arbitration as a tool to settle a dispute in his region of investigations. So arbitration is like just a court of justice, but not officially linked to the International Court of Justice. Every state have the right to choose one referee, one arbiter, or it could be, the most often is three arbiters in the tribunal of arbitration, but it could be also one, but it's more difficult to have one. Sometimes in the history, the Pope was the main arbiter. But the most important thing is when you have, when the states are using the arbitration mode to settle disputes, you need to follow the decision. You need to accept the decision. What that's sometimes very difficult when the arbitration with the arbitration decision. So the main classic one is to use the International Court of Justice process. That's, you know, the International Court of Justice is a part of the United Nations family. It's the principal judicial organ. And the mission, the legal mission of this International Court of Justice is to settle disputes. So you could see on this website of the International Court of Justice all the disputes linked to borders, maritime borders, island, cross-border phenomenon. Maybe they have already 60 or to 80 disputes since the last 30 years. So she's doing this International Court of Justice, this institution is doing a great job to settle dispute between states. And the decision made by the judges from this International Court of Justice are mandatory. You know, it's binding. The nature of the decision is binding. So the states should follow what the judge has decided. But here too is very difficult sometimes to put in place. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works in the second time, but sometimes it doesn't work. And I have the example between Colombia and Nicaragua. 3 years ago, Colombia and Nicaragua were in front of the International Court of Justice, and Colombia still refuses the decision of the judge. Of course, you need to have accepted the United Nations rules, and you need to have accepted the role of the jurisdiction of International Court of Justice. It's not the case of the United States of America. The USA don't recognize the authority of the International Court of Justice. So that's another problem. So you could have this perspective of different means, the progressions of different diplomatic means and legal jurisdictional means to settle peacefully a dispute. In the readings, I share with you in the readings an article about a very old border dispute between Lagash and Uma. Lagash is a Sumerian city here, and Uma is another Sumerian city here. And they were fighting together, the city of Lagash and the city of Uma, for having the benefit of the irrigated land in between, the Gedin land. It was a well irrigated land, so powerful for the agriculture. And these two Sumerian cities were already fighting for having the power to use this territory. So someone has read this article or not? Because my question for you, or the people who have read this article in the readings, is it a territorial, positional, or functional dispute? If someone on this room has read this article, she could answer, or he could answer, or you could answer when you want, okay? But I invite you to read this article of this author who draw a very nice article about these legal issues 5,000 years ago. And you will see the complexity of law at this time. It was not archaic system. It was very elaborated conflict with treaty of governance of natural resources, leasing, financial leasing. They were, I think it's Lagash the city of Lagash, who was renting the land for Umar, etc., etc., and with the arbitration of Kish, the king of Kish. The king of Kish was a very important city at this time here. And between Lagash and Umar, because they didn't succeed to manage their conflict, they asked for Kish, they asked for the king of Kish to be the arbitrator on their conflict. So as you notice, arbitration is an old legal mean used by different legal entities for a very, very long time. And we are still using the same tools. So I said in the introduction, we have different rules for land and sea situations. The disputes of a terrestrial nature, the states involved in a dispute of terrestrial nature needs to have two types of evidence: the historical titles and the effectivities. That's the two legal dimension of the proof of the evidence of dispute of territorial nature. And for the dispute of maritime nature, the rules are completely different because the humans have not been able to live permanently in the maritime space. So they use more mathematical rules like equity and geometry. As I said, remember, you're legal students in the law of borders. The most important to solve a dispute is to have the good proof, the good evidence on your side. And every state, when you look at YouTube videos or different documentary about how the judge of the International Court of Justice or of arbitration, they base their thinking, they base their decision on the proof, on their evidence, because they can't go on the ground to look at the details, So the evidence part are very important. That's the role of the main lawyers cabinet or lawyers office all around the world, is to provide the proof and the evidences for their government or for the people who pay their services. Let's now travel in different case studies. And I will speak about a land dispute at the summit of Mont Blanc between France and Italy. We will speak about the Canada-Denmark dispute of Hans Island, and we will speak about the Kasikili-Sedudu Island case between Botswana and Namibia in 1990. So maybe, Paola, I will ask you to intervene a little bit to share with us in 2 minutes, 3 minutes maximum, if you want, of course, the results of your article, because you wrote an article on this conflict. So if you have time, if you have the will to share with us your insights. Okay. So I will present the case, okay? And you could intervene later.
Okay.
So the Mont Blanc, the mountain, okay. The mountains, yeah, I'm presenting the case, and I ask you to give details later, okay, Paola? So the mountains of the Alps are natural mountains between, of course, they are all natural, natural border, if you want, between Italy, Switzerland, France, and Austria. That's a huge mountains, very large, and by hazard or by political means or by history, this mountains is used as a border between Italy and France, is used as a border between France and Switzerland, between Italy and Switzerland, and between Italy and Austria. And you have a dispute here. You have a dispute between Italy and France for the top, the summit of this mountain, the Mont Blanc. Italy has his version, has her version, and France has her own version too. They disagree about where the border is on this mountain. We have 3 tension points. At the left, you have here the Dôme du Goûter conflict. The two boundaries are not the same. The Italian boundaries are on the north, and the French boundaries are this one. But they disagree where the boundary is. The top of the Mont Blanc is here in the middle. So to have the prestige to have the Mont Blanc summit on your territory, you could imagine it's very important to have that, to say Mont Blanc is in France or Mont Blanc is in Italy, you know, because that's also useful to have this factor in mind. And you have another third tension point here on the right side with the point Elbronner. So 3 tension points between France and Italy. And Paola, could you describe your article for all of us, please? And could you summarize what you think is the conflict, what type of dispute it is, please?
Thanks, Ben. I'll try to do my best. So basically, as you pointed out, the disputed area is based on 3 tension points, and the dispute, is eradicated due to this treaty, which was signed in 1861 between France and Italy, and basically the 2 countries recognize the treaty, but France claims that the map is inaccurate. And so, and also France said that the original map went lost during World War II. So basically, France does not recognize, the Italian map, and goes back to the mapping that was designed during the Napoleon period, when Mont Blanc was divided into slopes, 1 French and 1 Italian. This question can, be apparently irrelevant. We are in Europe, we are in Schengen area, we are discussing about 2 countries which signed in 2022 a treaty about enforced cooperation, the Quirinal Treaty. But in fact, the Mont Blanc dispute created in the last 4 or 5 years many diplomatic and administrative incidents, also among the local municipalities, especially regarding the management of the, for example, winter sport, security of the winter sport, paragliding, and access to the slope of the mountains. And there is another problem that I tried to point out in my policy report, and it is the problem of climate change and the fact that probably, ice is melting, and so all the boundaries based on the watershed of the mountains are changing, are moving, and there is a need for a more precise mapping of this fact. And I base this on the fact that between Italy and Austria and Italy and Switzerland on the Alpine front, there are precise treaty mentioning an idea of mobile borders. And so an idea that borders on the watershed of mountains can be mapped on a periodical base, and the 2 countries share the idea that the borders are mobile. Another important fact that I thought yesterday when you talked to us about the digitization of the borders is that Italy and France had a digitization commission in 2021 about the digitization of their border. But what is interesting, I read all the papers for when I prepared my paper, that in the Mont Blanc area, they decided not to map the border in that area because they agreed to disagree, and so they said, no, we do not map in that area, which seems to be paradoxical. I mean, in my opinion, it doesn't make so much sense. And so the dispute still remains unsolved. It creates political issue in Italy. Periodically, there are, I mean, especially claims from right-wing parties and stuff talking about the Mont Blanc problem. Okay, people putting the Italian flag on slope on the mountain and stuff, and also administrative problems. And also, I mean, we talk so much about enforced cooperation and cooperation in the Mont Blanc area, and probably things would work better.
Thank you very much, Paola, for this summary of your paper and your findings. So very important point here, with the climate change effects, the borders delimited by the watershed lines are changing because the effect of the climate change are impacting the glaciers. So the glaciers are melting and the lines, the watershed lines is changing with the effect of the global warming. And as Paola said, some states like Austria and Italy and Switzerland have accepted this idea that the border could change regularly because the effect of the climate change. That's incredible. So they accept the idea of mobile border due to the effect of the global warming on the Alps. And of course, the global warmings are existing all around the world. So you will have maybe here an example of what could be done in other countries all around the world. Mobile border. The border is mobile. The people, the states are agreed on this mobile border concept, on this mobile border phenomenon, and they put that on the official legal treaties. And one specific also factor on this Mont Blanc issue between Italy and France. So someone could tell me what is the nature of this legal dispute? Is it territorial dispute, functional dispute, or positional dispute? Someone could answer me, please. Not Paola, of course, but someone else have an idea. What is the legal nature of this dispute? Is it territorial or more territorial? Is it positional or more positional, or is it functional? What do you think? You could answer me by raising your hand when you have the answer. But I wanted to share this corner of the slide. The Mont Blanc is like a snow. It's a glacier, but it's like a white snow at the top. But where are the rocks? Under the thickness of the glaze of the glacier, but the summit of the rock is not at the same way as the summit of the ice. So it will also one day, if they succeed to solve this dispute, they will need to take in consideration. But we are speaking about the top of the iceberg and the top of the Mont Blanc, which is glacier. It could change all the time, or they will speak about the top of the rock. The rock is strictly hard rocks below the glaciers. So for now, this dispute is still unsolved. As Paola said, a lot of legal and administrative issues between local entities and national governments. Let's speak a little bit with a case. I'm sure Sean will be happy to discuss on this case, but maybe he has something to share with us about the customs competencies about this new case. Is the island dispute between Canada and Denmark, dispute which has been living for the last 40 years, since 1970, but this dispute has been recently solved, like 2 years ago, between the two governments, with the participation of the Inuits who live on this land since immemorial time. So this dispute, and I will give some details. You see the island, that's a big, huge rock, very difficult inhabited land, but could be useful for the Inuit when the Inuit could hunt fish or birds on this island. But this island has a specific location. This island is exactly on the middle of the channel. You could see here the details. Zoom on this island. This island is exactly on the median line of this channel. And you could see where it's going, where it happens on the Earth is at the north of the Greenland, so very up before the Arctic Ocean at the end of this Baffin Bay. In an agreement, in an international treaty from 1972 between Denmark and Canada, they didn't delimitate the island. They let the island in the middle of the channel without cutting this island in two or without creating a condominium. Condominium could have been a nice idea to solve this issue. But 2 years ago, they accepted in a new treaty of delimitation to cut the island in two. As you see on the right corner on this slide, the new line cut this island in two. So the Canadian piece is a little bit smaller than the Danish piece, but I think they choose this line for the geography of the island. I don't know why exactly they have cut this island, not exactly in two exact same dimension, but okay. So they solved this situation by cutting the island in two. So they stopped the dispute on this island, which was a dispute for the last 50 years, and they integrated the Inuit sovereignty on the discussion, and the Inuit people who lived on this part, in either in Greenland or in Canada, they could have free access to this island for food purpose or for hunting purpose. That's a very interesting case with indigenous people involved in a treaty of negotiation in a border. So it means the border, the international border, doesn't cut the life of the borderlanders of, in this case, the Inuit people. Let's go on another dispute, French disputes, this case with Maurice. Maurice is an independent country, a small island in the Indian Ocean, close to Madagascar. But France has also two islands very close to Maurice. The L'Île La Réunion, or La Réunion Island, is a little bit island here close to Maurice. And Maurice and France decided to agree to the boundaries. The blue line here is the product of a legal treaty made by Maurice and La Réunion. So they accept this line. It's a treaty here. That's this border here, and the maritime ocean between Maurice and La Réunion is a product of an international treaty between these two countries. But Maurice and France disagree for this Tromelin. Tromelin is a very, very small island. It's like an atoll. And Maurice estimates that Tromelin is part of his territory. And of course, France estimates that Tromelin is part of his territory. So huge disagreement for the sovereignty about this little island. You could see an island here, Tromelin Island. They are fighting here. But France has the control of this island right now because they have used of scientific people or military soldiers. France is sending regularly some scientists and some military soldiers to check what's going on this atoll and around this atoll. But what's the interest of this little island? You will see it's a very small island, 1 kilometer, 500 meters, maximum 1 kilometer in the length and 700 meters on the width. You know, very small atoll. Of course, it's inhabited. But why they have a dispute, France and Maurice, on this small atoll? What's the interest? What's the political interest? What is the economical interest? Do you have an idea? We spoke about that yesterday, about this movement, this trend of territorialization of the ocean. But why the state want this piece of land? What's the interest? As you could see on this picture, it's just the sand and some little, it's not trees, there are not trees on this island, there's some little bushes, bushes. Someone has an idea why these two states are arguing and disputing this piece of land?
Is there a runway on it?
I think they built a little, not a, what's the same, airplane piste, a piste for airplanes, very small piste for airplanes. So the main interest to have a dispute for the country as France, the country of Maurice, is the economical exclusive zone. You remember yesterday?
Yeah.
Economical exclusive zone gives the rights for the states to have 200 miles maritime space all around this little atoll. It changes the situations dramatically. It's not the small island, it's not the rock on this small island, which is interesting. It's the maritime space around it. It's the economic exclusive zone around this little atoll, and you have the right to have 200. Your economic exclusive zone could go until 200 nautical miles, so almost 400 kilometers all around this little atoll. So it's a huge source of economical power for fishing, for natural resources. And that's the main trend today for the last 20, 30 years. You will see all around the world, a lot of islands, a lot of countries, they are disputing the right, the sovereign rights, their sovereignty, their titles of sovereignty on every pieces of rocks, because these little rocks, in this case, is a small atoll, give you the right to exploit the natural resources and the sea. So what were the legal argument from France and from Mauritius to defend their rights and their sovereignty on this island? So France has the monopoly of the discovery on this little atoll. So for France, this atoll is a terra nullius. So it means a terra when no one was living here. And they occupied this little island, I told you, by scientific people, like the people expert on the weather. They created a base for measuring and calculating the weather, the presence of tsunami or the presence of storms, of twisters. So they have a permanent occupation since 1954. And they use also national legislation to prove and to regulate the activities all around this island. That's the three legal arguments from France. What are the legal arguments from Maurice? And you will see where is the legal problem here. Why Maurice has the motivation to reclaim this island for the sovereignty of Maurice. They have, in fact, the problems emerge with a purely translation problem between French and English. In the treaty, when Maurice became independent from UK, they signed a treaty between France and United Kingdom. In this treaty, in the Article 8 is the problem. It's written in French in the official treaty, not in English, but I will share with you in English. The Article 8 organizes the cession by France to the UK of Mauritius and its dependencies, namely Rodrigues and the Seychelles. Look at well, huh? Namely Rodrigues and the Seychelles. Where is Tromelin? Doesn't exist yet. Therefore, in this treaty, Tromelin is not mentioned, okay? But in the English translation, it's written especially. So the main problem for France, but for Maurice, the key reason of the dispute is on this treaty, Tromelin is not ceded to France. So Maurice estimates as the sovereign rights to this island of Tromelin. It's just this interpretation of this term, especially. The problem for Maurice is the official treaty in 1884 is only on French language. And as you know, the legal version of the treaty, in this case, it's the French language as kind of authority in the terminological battle. And today, Maurice has put Tromelin in his own constitution. He continues to defend his sovereign rights to have this island Tromelin on his territory. But of course, France occupied the territory and of course refuses every legal action from Maurice. So let's pursue our adventure in the case studies. And this one is a case study between Namibia and Botswana. This dispute was for the determination of where is the international border. Where is the border in the river Chobe? As you see in this map, you have a river Chobe between Botswana and Namibia. And at one point on this river, you have two arms. The arms of the North Channel, and the arm of the South Channel. And in between these two channels, you have a big island named Kasikili from the Namibia and named Sedudu for the Botswana. So it's the same island with two names. The issue was this one. Where is the international border? The international border is on the north or is on the south? Of course, for the Namibia, the interest is to have a border in the South Channel because it means the island is on the territory of Namibia. And the opposite for Botswana. For Botswana, the international border is on the North Channel. It means the island is on the territory of Botswana. Remember the law of delimitation yesterday afternoon? We have spoke about different types of delimitation in the rivers. And you remember the Talweg. Talweg is the name of the channel of navigation in the river, where the channel is deeper and where the boat could navigate without problems, without rocks. So the judge should define where is the Talweg. Where is the Talweg? On the channel north, on the channel south, on the South Channel. The problem of the Talweg is that this name has multiple legal nuances. It could be the channel of navigation, but the channel of navigation sometimes is not where you have the deepest depth on the river. So the court decision, after a careful analysis of all the criteria, the depth and the width of the channel, the flow, the volume of water transported by the river, the configuration of the bed of the channel, and the degree of navigability, the court has decided that the boundary follows the line of the deepest soundings in the North Channel of the Chobe River. So the judges have decided that the island Kasikili Sedudu Island is therefore part of the territory of the Republic of Botswana. You understand the importance to have a clear identification of the criteria to determine border. In this case, it was the Talweg legal dimension. Let's go now to visit the South American continent. It's a very recent case where the judges have succeeded to resolve an ancient dispute between Chile and Bolivia. The judgment was from 1st December 2022, so 1 year and a half. It was about the waters of the river Silala. The problem here is there were a disagreement between the legal definition of what is a river and what is Silala. Chile was saying the opposite of Bolivia. For Chile, Silala was an international river. So because it's an international river, Bolivia should respect the international characteristics of this river and should not do what she wanted, what Bolivia wanted with this water. So the question, the legal question posed by the judge was this one. Is the Silala River, is the Silala watercourse an international or a national watercourse? And remember, if the judges decide that this river is international, it means they share, the two states are sharing the same river and no one has the right to do what they want with this, the water of the river, okay? So for Bolivia, the interest was to say it's not at all an international river. We don't care about Chile. The Chile has no sovereignty on our national river. But the decision of the judges, sorry, I am entering Ben. Okay, Ben, you enter. For the judges, there is no doubt that this Silala River is in fact an international watercourse. And because it's an international watercourse, the parties agree that they have both the same right to the equitable and reasonable use of the waters of this river. That's the important point. If this river is not national, and if this river is legally recognized as an international river, the two states or the three states share the same river. And it means what? It means they have the same equitable and reasonable right to use the water of this international river. That was the decision of the judge. They said this river is international and Bolivia and Chile share the same international river and they have the same equitable and reasonable rights to use, they have the same right to use to the equitable and reasonable use of the waters of the Sierra. Well done, judges. So concretely, as I said, the two parties, Chile and Bolivia, have the right to equitable and reasonable utilization of the waters and the obligation to take all appropriate measures to prevent significant harm to the other party. That's also a very important point in cross-border environmental disputes. You need to take in consideration the effect of your action in your own territory on the neighbors, on the territory of your neighbor. You can't do what you want. You need always, when you change the river's flow, when you put a dam, or when you create any big farm or industry on this river, you need to have in mind, if you are the state, to take in consideration the presence, the interest of your neighbor, your other national neighbor, who is sharing the same river than you. But let's take a little bit distance and let's speak about the name, the period of today, and some people are speaking about the Anthropocene. What is the Anthropocene? Anthropocene succeeds the expression of Holocene. And you have other critical authors who are speaking about Capitalocene. It's important to have this huge concept in mind when you want to understand what is environment and what are cross-border environmental disputes. So Holocene is the geological era of the last 12,000 years after the last glaciation. Anthropocene is the era where the humans have been detected as the main influence of the planetary future because their industrial effects. Capitalocene, as I said, is an alternative concept to signify that it's not every state who are responsible of the climate change. It's just the states who use strong industrial industries, some industrial companies, sorry. So it means Capitalocene is the critical version of the Anthropocene by saying that's the only capitalist countries, capitalist organization who are responsible for the climate change. And what are the planetary boundaries concept? Is a scientific concept developed in Sweden by a team of scientific searchers. And they created 12 technical limits where the planet Earth could be still livable for all the human or not. That's a very important trend of research, planetary boundaries. And it's just 15 years ago. This concept has been created 15 years ago, the planetary boundaries concept, and because we know the effect of global warming as in the 70s a long time ago, okay? So now a lot of legal specialists are working on these planetary boundaries to transform the technical and scientific approach of planetary boundaries in legal obligation. We have an environment, we have a legal definition of what is environment. Environment includes abiotic and biotic natural resources such as air, water, soil, fauna, and flora, and the interaction between the same factors. Also, environment includes also the goods that make up the cultural heritage and the characteristics aspects of the landscape. This legal definition is from an international treaty called the Convention on Civil Liability of 1993. The judges of the Court of Justice have also proposed the definition of what is environment. The environment is not an abstraction, but the space where human beings live and on which the quality of their life and their health depends, including for future generations. It's from an International Court of Justice in the case of opinion of the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. But in this case, it's not a judgment, it's not an award, it's just an opinion. So it's not legally binding, but it's important to have this legal definition in mind. So we saw in the protection of the environment, it existed already certain rules at the Greek time, ancient Greek time. They were protecting spring waters. During the Middle Ages, we have also some environmental rules condemning urban air pollutions. And more the pollution were ongoing on the cities. Some national law appeared to create a better, healthy environment on the cities. So it's like a very recent branch of law environment. We have also old examples of a treaty for specific rivers or for a specific protection of an animal species. And more, in fact, because the huge, how to say, the huge accident in the maritime ocean, in the ocean and maritime seas, with the catastrophe of Tower Canyon, Amoco Cadiz, and Chernobyl, the environment became more and more important for the policymakers at the legal and political level. Two main conferences were very important to develop the environmental law, where it's the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment in 1972, and the conference in Rio, Earth Summit in 1992. They developed very important concepts. Since 1972, they developed the obligation for the state to cooperate for environmental problems, and they developed also 26 common principles, including the principle of prevention of transboundary damage to the environment. So it's an old principle, more 50 years ago, 50 years, this principle. And 20 years later, in Rio, they developed the precautionary principle and the sustainable development principle. They developed also the biodiversity convention, etc. So in short, it was the legal landscape of the development and environmental law. When you have a cross-border environmental dispute, always you need to start by using the dominant framework to pose the problem. International law is based on the sovereignty of the states, and the sovereignty of the states means that the states have the exclusive control on their territories and on the natural resources on these territories. Okay, full sovereignty of every state on their territories. And so it means full sovereignty of the states on the natural resources on their territories. But this principle is too rigid, too strict, and they have developed like environmental principles who are taking in consideration the transnationality of environmental problems. They develop some different legal principles, but the most important one for the cross-border environmental disputes is this one, the principle of prevention of transboundary damage to the environment. And we spoke a little bit about that with the Silala River decision. You need every state have the obligation to take in consideration the neighbors when they are doing something in their territory. If they want to create a nuclear industry close to the border, they need to ask, not the permission, but they need to inform their neighbors of their actions to build this nuclear factory. It's the same when you use a river, common river. You need to inform your neighbor when you want to create a dam or when you want to change the quality or the quantity of the flow on this river. That's a legal obligation developed by the environmental law, and specifically this very important principle of prevention of transboundary damage to the environment. We will see different case study later, but one of the main feature of environmental dispute is complicated. Environmental disputes are very difficult to analyze by the legal scholar, by the judges. That's why sometimes the states, they don't want to make public their environmental problems. They try to hide these things because it's difficult with the public opinion to have a clear political action on this topic. And because it's super complicated to find proof of pollution. Proving a pollution is not an easy task, and that's a part of the characteristics of environmental dispute. We have, for the last 30 years, we have two important cases connected to a cross-border environmental dispute. The case of the Gatchikovo-Nagymaros Dam on the Danube River, and the case of the pulp mills on the river Uruguay in 2010. We will speak a little bit of the case of pulp mills on the river Uruguay between Argentina and Uruguay. It's the same idea. Argentina and Uruguay share an international river. So they have the obligation to share information in relation with their national development. But in this case, Uruguay has decided to create a huge pulp mills. So it means a company to create papers directly connected to the river. So Argentina was fearing about the huge pollution of the river. In this case, the court in 2010 observes that the principle of prevention as a customary role finds its origin in the due diligence of the state on its territory. It is about the obligation for any state not to allow its territory to be used for the purposes of acts contrary to the rights of other states. Again, is the reinforcement of the principles of non-damaging the territory of the neighbors when you share the same river, or when you have an activity in your side of your territory, but an activity which could have a huge impact on the other side. And in this decision, in 2010, the judges have created a new legal instrument. They said it's necessary to have a cross-border assessment when you use the natural resources of the environment. It's an obligation now developed by the court to say when some activities will cause a transboundary harm. It's an obligation to have an environmental impact assessment to solve the cross-border environmental disputes.